Thank you, choir. John was a little concerned because it wasn't an Advent song, but it certainly fits our theme today very, very, very well. And it's part of our core DNA, I hope, at Discovery, belonging. Belonging is a very important and deep concept. I was thinking this week of a word that is the opposite of belonging. It's a pretty horrible word, and I think a lot of us have experienced the opposite of belonging. And that word I was thinking about was humiliation. Humiliation. Now, some of us have had experiences of humiliation that have been so very, very terrible. And I don't want to bring up the word and pretend like it's not a damaging thing or a triggering thing or a thing that can dig up some really awful, awful things. When I bring up a word like that in worship, I bring it up for us to know that we can heal, and there's other possibilities, and we are not alone. And we're part of a group of people who have experienced humiliation in one way or another. So just creating safety, and let's explore humiliation just a little bit more. It came up for me this week, just as a living life as a person, and also just looking at some of the back and forth across these weeks and months of the war in the Middle East. And I was thinking, oh gosh, the lens of humiliation, people feeling humiliated, and other people feeling humiliation, and others' humiliation, and images of humiliation, and just continue. It's so very, very overwhelming. Humiliation is something we can feel as individuals. Humiliation is something that bullies can practice rather well any place on earth. And humiliation is a tool. It is a weapon of warfare. And it can just escalate. So humiliation, it's something we just need to take a look at. And maybe we can take a stab at it so that it is not such a powerful thing in the world. Is that me? No, it's not me. Or is it me? It's Jeff's birthday today, so I kind of wanted to stay on top of some texts, but I won't mention that till prayer time. So it's the one day that my family is like texting extra. So we're talking about humiliation and its powerfulness. And another reason the word came up is that it's there also in our reading from Isaiah 61. Isaiah 61 addresses a group of people who have been humiliated. So in this part of Isaiah is a massive book. So we group it into first Isaiah, which maybe took place in a certain era, and then some decades and actually hundreds of years passed for second and third Isaiah. And that's the part of Isaiah we're at right now. And in that part of Isaiah, the writers of Isaiah are acknowledging a people who have been humiliated. They were a people that actually had some power and control, and maybe some savviness in their lives, but due to war, over and over again, they lost their power, they lost their city, they were humiliated. Their worship site was hacked up and destroyed, and some of them were packed up like prisoners and taken to live in exile in Babylon. And this humiliation lasted for decades. It was very devastating, and even in Babylon, there's this devastating sense that they're being mocked for their culture, mocked for what they believe in. It's a very humiliating situation, year over year over year, generational trauma, you might say. So the writers of Isaiah have different strategies and approaches to help people understand what the heck happened. I thought we were God's people and God was going to look out for us. What the heck has happened? Does God hate us now? How could we have been so very, very humiliated? Well, walking it back to our own personal experiences of being humiliated, and don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to talk out loud in any way that makes you feel unsafe or anything, but just, think of times, and you don't have to indicate, have you ever felt humiliated? You don't have to say it out loud, but just say, have you ever felt humiliated? And, think about how that felt. Sure, it's not a great thing. It's just one of those really terrible human emotions. I think that when I was trying to imagine at times where I have felt humiliated, I have felt worthless, I have felt alone, I have felt like it's just so unjust. How could this be happening? Does anybody see? It's just one of the most awful feelings in the world. Thinking more about humiliation, it really is a super core matter of human identity and human worth and identity. When we are humiliated, there is something that has been stolen or damaged that is very, very worthy. Like, what is going on? Somebody has done something to us. It gets at a mysterious thing that makes us who we are. Humiliation goes after some invisible quality that is us, that is just who we are, our agency, how we operate, our difference, and just something very, very sacred. I was thinking in terms of the Bible or theology, perhaps it is the image of God within us. Like each one of us, and part of our theology is that we are all children of God. We are beloved children of God, and we are made in God's image, and there is that within us, and that it is a very, very sacred thing. And when we are humiliated, that is somehow assaulted. It is an assault on our very sacredness. So it's a super important matter, the issue of being humiliated. So it's not surprising when we feel humiliated, we feel like we need to do something about it. It's part of our survival, part of, again, who God made us to be. And perhaps then it's not surprising that when we are humiliated, it can take us on a course of humiliating somebody else. Because it's so important. It's so important. I was thinking about another thing about humiliation is if you have power and you have been humiliated, you will use the levers of power to humiliate somebody else, probably. And if you do not have power, sometimes you have to sit with your humiliation. And it can really do a number on us. Trauma maybe makes us retaliate or escalate something. And I think that that's what can happen in war. That someone's humiliated, well, then we're going to humiliate you. Well, then we're going to humiliate you next. And then he started it. No, you started it. Sometimes humiliation, it just feels like this bottomless pit that will never, never end. This horrible, dark, evil, terrible thing. Whew. So it's a rough topic. How do we have any sort of foothold in this at all? So that bounced me into Isaiah 61. Isaiah 61 is addressing people who have been humiliated across years, decades, generations of total humility. And in Isaiah 61, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." Who's me? Well, I noticed when I was reading and rereading this passage, there seems to be like 3 different entities going on there. There is this me of Isaiah, and in this Isaiah, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Well, this Spirit of the Lord that is upon, we'll say Isaiah, or that group of Isaiah, that Spirit leads Isaiah to care for people who have been humiliated. And in this caretaking, does he recommend retaliation, humiliate him back? Not at all. What happens with God's anointing Isaiah is that Isaiah senses he is to bring good news to the poor. He is to bind up the brokenhearted. He is to release those who have been unjustly captured. He is to proclaim a whole year of joy and justice. And he is to lift up those who are in mourning. So that is his special role, is to address those who have been humiliated. Wow, that's good news. Another piece of really good news in this text is God. God's voice weighs in to this chapter too. And I love the line that says, I am God and I love justice. I love justice. When we have been humiliated, we can feel like justice has been broken. And I know for me, in certain situations, I think, wow, it just feels fathomless. The darkness, the enabling, the misunderstanding, the continuation of patterns. It just feels so very overwhelming. But one thing that's helped me get a foothold, and I think it speaks to this verse, is I believe in a God who loves justice. Another go-to verse for me is in Romans 4, verse 5. It also says that I have faith in a God of righteousness, that God is a righteous one who corrects wrongs. I may be experiencing wrongs, I may be seeing humiliation, I may be seeing this fathomless pit of darkness, either personally or on a larger scale, but I believe in a God of justice and righteousness. That also can be found in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 23. It talks about in the midst of injustice and unrighteousness, we believe in a God who is just. It gives us a foothold in a cycle of humiliation. A final image or entity in Isaiah 61 are the people themselves. What happens to these humiliated people? In the text, it says that God sees those humiliated people, and we saw them as our pigs, by the way. Our pigs these days are representing kind of how we feel when we're sad, alone, feel like we don't belong, humiliated, in exile, whatever it is. We're conjuring that in this Advent season, that scratchy feeling of burlap. When we have that experience, we can just feel like dirt. But this text says that God sees those people who have been humiliated and who are suffering. In God's eyes, they are oaks of righteousness. Oaks of righteousness. Hey, I'm going to invite you to do something right now, to say a sentence out loud. And the sentence is, it doesn't mean me, it's you. I am an oak of righteousness. Let's say it together. I am an oak of righteousness. You are an oak of righteousness. That's how God sees you. God gives you agency no matter what. Nobody can take that away. God gives you worth no matter what. Nobody can steal it or crush it. You are always going to have that, no matter what is happening in history. And I love it in Bible study when it comes up. We're like studying the text, and then somebody did it this week, says, man, isn't that what's going on right now? You know, this cycle of violence and terribleness. So we acknowledge, you know, in some ways there's nothing new under the sun. Like history repeats, it goes on. But it doesn't mean we should be futile and do nothing. No, it just says, okay, this goes on. Yes, stuff like this goes on. Humiliation, it's been around for thousands of years, and yet we still stand. And yet people are still here. And that leads to our Advent prayer that I hope you're going to hear every week, or if you look at our study materials, our Advent prayer is belief. We believe the world can be a kinder place, and each one of us plays a role. We have a role in dignifying, the opposite of humiliation. We are oaks of righteousness who can dignify, rehumanize, see people, lift people up like we demonstrated in Time for Discovery today. We practice that in church. We act it out so that maybe it plunks into our brain when we're feeling overwhelming feelings. We can think, okay, there's something more. There's light. There's possibility. There's hope. And I can play a part in that. I can have the courage to speak up. I can have the hope to imagine something different. I can have the faith to play a role. So I assure you, each one of you plays a role. You can do this. Courage, speaking up, lifting up, helping out. And here's a closing question that you don't have to say, you don't have to answer out loud. When has somebody made you feel dignified? When has somebody or something made you feel like you were real, you were worthy? What has helped you feel like a recovery from humiliation? Let us practice dignifying and be part of God's kindness, God's bold act of kindness wherever we go. To God be the glory. Amen.